Hi everybody, this is Eric Tipton with the Authentic Campaigner, and I am here just south of Indianapolis with the Mudsills for their reunion. The Mudsills are an organization that started out the Authentic movement, and I wanted to kind of give everybody an introduction. So without further ado, why don't I go ahead and have the guys introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a little discussion here. So let's start over here.
I'm Mark Upton.
Chris Kraft.
George Derenburger.
Paul McKee.
And why don't you tell me a little bit about your roles in the Mudsills?
Well, at this point, you've got the first four captains of the organizations. And that is the basis of it.
Okay. Let's just start out with, to give everybody an introduction about the Mudsills. Who are the Mudsills, and how did the Mudsills get started?
Well, the concept of the Mudsills started in the early 70s when we had a lot of small groups, 8, 10, 12, 14 people running around with flags representing 20 different units. And I started going around and talking to other units and saying, hey, when we're at these different events, why don't we get together and form a big unit? And there was a certain number that were receptive. But what we were finding was some of the units themselves weren't, but a lot of the members were. And we started to grow. And the Mudsills, which our regimental name was the 5th Kentucky Infantry, and Mudsills that were made up of a lot of different organizations that when they were still in their home states and everything, were still functioning as First Wisconsin or whatever. But when we were together, we were that one unit, 5th Kentucky Volunteers, Mudsills. One thing I would add, the question that's been asked me over the years many times is, why the Mudsills? Where that name came from? And if you don't know, a Mudsill was the lowest log in the foundation of a cabin. And the rest of the cabin was supported by that foundation. Well, the Western soldiers and the infantry really felt they were the foundation that supported the Union. So they took the name Mudsills. It had nothing to do with the Mudsill concept of the lower orders and all that. It was strictly the Mudsill supported a cabin. It rested on them. The Union rests on what we do out here. We're the Mudsills of the Army.
What year about was it when the Mudsills really get started?
Well, George had First Ohio out of Columbus, and then I was with an organization out of the Worcester area,
Okay.
Worcester, Ohio area, the 41st Ohio.
Okay.
And what was our first event that we worked together?
I really, it's been so, it might have been long, I don't recall. Yeah, Shiloh maybe or something, yeah.
So the 41st in Ohio started working with the 1st Ohio, and then we brought in the 100, some of the 100th Ohio, some guys from northwestern Ohio, 2 or 3 guys, and it just started to build. And at Zenith, we had troops from Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Missouri, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin.
Eventually Kentucky.
Eventually Kentucky.
We also had the first Colorado that came to a couple events a year, all the way from Colorado, and we had a member in California.
I'm kind of liking this Buckeye connection. I grew up in Ohio, so I wasn't aware that there was such an Ohio connection with this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Who were some of the original vendors? Today, everybody's used to their guys that make the gear, basically.
Right.
We've got vendors for uniforms, for hats. We've got vendors for everything. And I think one of the things that people don't appreciate is how far the uniforms have come from when you guys started out. Can you tell me a little bit about the uniforms, how the uniforms got started, and who the vendors were? And
There were no vendors.
No.
We would get patterns and we would find seamstress. and give them patterns and uniforming. Some of the guys had wives that could do it, but it was all privately made. I really was not aware of anybody selling Civil War military, reenactment military, commercially until Jarnigan. Now, there may have been some before, but that's really the first one that I am aware of.
Okay.
By the 1980s, Joe Covey was a very major force as far as a vendor for a lot of us.
Covey. I have a guy that has a frock coat by Covey that he's going to send to me next week, actually.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
But then a lot of us did research on our own and taught ourselves to sew and create, because there wasn't the stuff that was necessarily available commercially. And if you really wanted something really nice and you knew what you were doing, you teach yourself how to sew and create it for yourself.
okay, now I've heard stories that there were literally guys out there in like blue jackets and blue jeans carrying original rifles. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Well, we had, when we first got started, we all had original rifles.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only repros available was the Zouave in the Mississippi,
Right.
and they started importing some British copies of the Enfields. But the majority of our guys all had original muskets, Springfields, Enfields, or whatever. Yeah.
I carried an original 1861 Springfield and original leathers even at that time.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was that stuff still pretty pretty inexpensive at that point?
No, no. I mean, it was all relative to the time and the economy at that time and prices at that time. Of course, it's grown in value since, but you know, a lot of guys had collected this stuff early on,
Right.
way back in the early '60s when you could get a musket for $30.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even when we were doing it, they were a few hundred, a few $100s. They weren't up to the 800, 1,000, or whatever. But see, when I started, which was 1961, not only original muskets, a lot of groups out there were original leather, cartridge boxes, belts,
Yeah.
cap boxes, bayonet scabbards, canteens, all kind of original stuff was out because it was actually cheaper at that time than buying remade repro stuff.
Heck, in the late 1960s, my first musket was an 1816. I bought for $75 at a yard sale, and I had to save up my mowing money just to get that, and I was so happy.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, the first reproduction brogans that we found were coming out of Japan.
Really?
The fry shoe out of
Yeah.
Japan. Yeah, those, and when we found them, it was like, oh, these are great, we need to get these. And so we, as a group, we bought a whole shipment of them.
So what was the reaction as you guys started getting more authentic and started getting some of this gear and you're going out to events, and what was the reaction to the other people? Was it, you know, about kind of like the mainstream versus the, you know, the hardcores or whatever they talk about today, but I'm curious about what it was like back then.
Well, you know, before we get into that in any depth, I have to say the first time I saw the first Ohio, George's unit from back then, I was in high school and I saw him at an event at Lisbon, Ohio. And here were all these guys running around like World War II Marines, and then here's this one group doing close order drill. And even then, I knew enough about the Civil War that those guys are doing this right. And that impressed me even then. So, yeah, I think that's the way it spread, Eric. We'd show up to an event and we'd have 20, 25 guys at that time, early on, and ones and twos would see that. And it was the same reaction. Wow, those guys are doing this the way it should be done.
Now, there was rarely ever an event when it was over that a couple guys didn't come up to us, not necessarily me, but somebody, and say, how do we join you guys? And we said, it's real easy. You just go out and get the right stuff. We'll help you on that, and you're in. Yeah, there was no real requirements other than just that you want to do the right thing.
Right.
It was the bicentennial event in 1976, Gettysburg was a big deal. It wasn't particularly an anniversary of Gettysburg, but I happened to fall in with another group from Ohio. I was going to college at Ohio Wesleyan at the time, and these guys took me in, were really nice to me. I was, as we'd say, a flaming farb, but I had a 3-band Springfield musket, original. My leather gear was good. I had managed to acquire a pair of fry shoes. The rest of it was pretty hard. Yeah. And it's one of those things, you're trying to make that effort, but you don't know enough as to where to get the best things. And after that event, I went to another event with these guys. Very generous people, very kind and caring, but it wasn't where I wanted to be. And the leader of the group said, I think you need to go to this event down in southern Indiana next month. And okay, you know, got family down there. I'll put the weekend together. And go to court in Indiana, and it was a different event, but I ran into Chris Kraft, George Derenburger. They put me in a tent with Mike Grant, and that may have been the wrong thing to do. But Mike,
he stayed with us. I don't
Mike's one of those individuals that you'll never forget. But he did nothing but try and convince me this is the way, this is where we're going. And George was very kind to let me stay in ranks in spite of my uniform miscomings at that point in time. And I tell you, by the end of the weekend, I said, this is it, this is where I want to be. And I think the next event was Jefferson Barracks out in St. Louis the following month. And by that time, Ann had managed to get me a shell jet, a 4-button pair of trousers, and I was rolling. Awesome time, and I've never looked back.
How long did it take you guys to get a hold of uniforms back then? I mean, now you can order, basically, you guys keep stuff in stock and you can get something in a couple of weeks or maybe.
This was a seamstress. She got my measurements, and it took her a little while to get it put together. Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, because it wasn't a commercial enterprise, it was a seamstress doing many uniforms and orders.
Yeah, cottage industry.
Yeah.
We had an event in Illinois, 77, 78, Knoxville, Illinois. And we came to that event, and there were two or three other quasi authentic organizations at that event. And when it came time for the Sunday afternoon battle, we went out, we had maybe 30 guys in line, and I'll never forget looking up over behind me, and here comes another group of 6 or 8 guys, and they come running down and said, can we get on the end of the line? And then here comes a couple of other guys. We ended up with 80 men in line that day, and that was it. That was it. These guys just kept coming in.
Yeah, that was really that event right there was when it really took off, yes. Because almost everybody fell in with us, stayed with us.
That's right.
Yeah, that's actually one of my personal philosophies, that you can't make people do this. You have to show them how to do it, and that's what I've seen over the years. I was the same way. I mean, when I got into it and I saw that it was Perryville 2002 when they did the 105th Ohio, and those guys came up over the hill. It was the GHTI at the time, and that was my first big event, 2002. But it was the same thing, seeing those guys compared to being camped with all the tents and all that stuff, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. At its height, how many people could the Mudsills field?
Well, we had Gettysburg in 81? We had 600 or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Inauguration in 76?
77.
77, we had several hundred. I don't know. Totally, we never had per se a membership roll.
Right.
But basically, when you would, at the end of the year, go back and look at everybody that signed in with us, there was, over a year's time, there would be several hundred people. There were some guys that lived distant, maybe New Jersey, could only get out once a year or something. But yeah, I don't know what maybe after I had to leave, maybe there was bigger than Gettysburg or something, I don't know.
We had, for the Reagan inaugural parade, that didn't happen because of the weather. We had just Mudsills. We had 5 50-man companies, just for the parade. Now, we also worked with the Eastern groups. And so we had a total that marched as the Mudsills. We had 500 at that inaugural parade. I don't know that we had more than that anywhere else. Do you remember?
Not off the top of my head.
I
I know when we actually had the formal membership rolls, probably at the peak, we were in the neighborhood of about 350.
Yeah.
At least folks that said, here's my $10 and keep me on the
Right.
newsletter. So, yeah, now, did all of them come into the field? Now, some people just like to follow what we were doing.
Right.
And some were just roundtable guys, but for the vast majority, they made at least one event a year, and there was that hardcore following that didn't miss an event. So,
Right.
It's kind of still the model the way it is today, actually. As you guys well know, there's people are generally independent. Reenactors as a group are even more independent than I think the general population is, and a lot of people have tried to do umbrella organizations, especially on the authentic side, and it doesn't really seem to work that well. You guys are probably familiar with the Western Independent Greys in the early 2000s until recently would field a battalion. It was basically a group of guys down in Franklin and Nashville that would plan events and put events together, which, let me kind of jump off of that here for a second. You guys, it sounds like a lot of what you guys did was like what we would call adjuncts today. You would go to basically mainstream events and you'd put it together a battalion. Were there events that you guys did separately that you guys organized on your own?
Oh, my gosh.
Okay.
National
What
parks.
we actually were looked upon very favorably by the National
Yes.
Park Service. We received invitations to go to various national parks. We would invite one of the or two of the authentic Confederate groups, which would be the what was it, Texas Guard, Denny Sessom's outfit,
Right.
and Flavors. But some of the ones we did up north, like Fort Niagara, was impractical. But yeah, those were living history, no battles or anything. Strictly living history, garrison type situation or camp, depending on where we were at. But yeah, we received invitations from not only National Park Service, but from, like, not Fort Niagara, private state museums and sites and everything. Yeah, and we did. We always did usually a couple a year of just that type. Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, because the national parks, obviously, we still do
Right.
a lot of living histories at the national parks. Were there a lot of restrictions on you guys with the firearms and all that back then, or?
Not really.
No.
Well, if we were on national park, you weren't going to do a reenactment. They wanted to make sure that we were, especially if we had our artillery contingent with us, that the safety rules that they had, especially for artillery, was fired. And they would watch what we were doing with the rifles, and it was certainly, they said that's acceptable. But no, they really didn't. They were very easy to work with, very complimentary, and I don't think we ever had really any complaints from anybody in the Park Service at all the different parks we were at over there.
One of the great events we got to do, we were invited by the United States Army at West Point to come to West Point, do a living history. We got to parade on the plane, and we went with our field music, and they wanted us to come there for the purpose of doing a video of live fire the way it would have been done during the Civil War, that they then could show in their history classes for the cadets. So we did. We went and they had targets set up and they videoed all this, and we fire by file, fire by rank, fire by company, And we also had a Henry there, and to show the difference there, and we demonstrated loading the musket and what that entailed. And it was a real honor to be able to go to West Point and work for the Army.
Just kind of individually, what would you say was your most memorable event that you did?
Most memorable. I'd say as far as the living history goes, the Park Service event at Chickamauga, the very first one that I did, because it just rocked me so in terms of, and that was probably about my 5th or 6th Mudsill event. So I was rolling at that point in time. Occasionally we had the opportunity to do a tactical situation where you actually employ your skills in a wargaming type situation. And we were able to participate in a number of those. Probably the one that I enjoyed the most was down Loudon, Tennessee. Donnie Vandergriff had set up, got judges and set up a set of rules that we couldn't even begin to win. So we thought, all right, we got our tails kicked at the beginning of this, and all right, no way we're going to win. How can we have fun and just make everybody's life miserable on the other side? and we did. Ended up Saturday night when the curfew was about to begin, we'd scouted out and found out that our opponents had settled down for supper, and there were 2 pickets on the line, and we formed in a column. We had a couple skirmishers designed to pick off the 2 pickets, and we went in company and column and over the breastworks. The guys had their arms stacked. We were on top of them. Enjoy your dinner, boys. Yeah, we scored a lot of points on that one, but it was just a great night, a great weekend to work with the fellows across the way and within our own units, because you got a chance to see some small unit activity that you wouldn't otherwise employ.
Chris, what about you?
You know, Eric, I have to say that it would depend on the event. I don't know that I can pick out one event, because as Mark was alluding to, you would have living histories on, and at those you were on display. You were educating, because they come in by the thousands to see you. We would do one Fort Niagara, for instance. We would do on Memorial Day weekends, and we would do it every other year. It was almost like a contract with the historic site. And we'd live right there in the fort, and the officers got to live in the castle, and it was awesome. And I'll never forget the time the staff from the Russian embassy came. And there were thousands of people here, and these people came through, and we're drilling, and we had an artillery piece, and we're doing firing demonstrations, but we're drilling as though the crowd is not there. And after the drill, we break ranks and we're doing whatever we have to do, and people would come up and ask us. And the staff from the Russian embassy was shocked to find out we weren't part of the U.S. military as a ceremonial group, and that we actually owned our own guns. And then on top of that, you mean you really owned that artillery piece, even though it's a period piece? They couldn't believe that. And then you had the big reenactments, and that would be the big draws, and that's where you would get the massive, 125th events would draw anywhere from 12 to 15,000 troops. And so you would have brigades, and it was all military structures. The only way you could do it in a short period of time, and it worked very well. So that had its own appeal.
What were those? You know, a lot of these larger events now, the numbers have gone down.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking like a few thousand now that are going out. What was it like going to one of these events with tens of thousands of people out there?
I'm speaking for myself, it was a lot of work, and it was not fun because of the responsibility involved. And you had to know where you were going, when you had to be there. You had to make sure your men have the water. You have to make sure that everything is ready to go. They've got their ammunition. They do the safety checks. All those kind of things had to be done. And what you saw at the big reenactment was a culmination of a huge expense and a huge amount of effort that required going to meetings a year ahead of time,
Right.
to get this thing organized and make sure it would work. and establishing your staff and organizing your staff and communicating with all the organizations that are part of the Mudsills, but that are outside of the state of Ohio for me. And you had to communicate. This is before cell phones and that sort of thing.
Right.
So it was an immense amount of work. Telephone bills would run into $300–400 a month.
No email.
It's before the internet.
Yeah, no internet.
There was nothing easy about it.
No, there was nothing easy. But then again, you fielded battalion, you fielded a brigade. At the 1999 Gettysburg, there were a federal division. I mean, a full-size federal division. And there were 36,000 troops in that.
Yeah.
And but that almost got to be too big because the logistics were so massive that you've got this, wow, here comes Pickett's charge, and they're doing 12,000 to 15,000 troops coming at you, and then here goes a pickup truck across it because of logistical problems.
Right.
So it would kind of ruin that.
Yeah, I had heard that one of those that they had close to the original numbers of Pickett's
Yes,
charge.
that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. So you had three different kinds of events. Your living histories, those were your brotherhood events, because those where you had the fewer number of people, but you got to connect with people, and that's where you built your esprit de corps.
Mhm.
And that's why we're here today. And then you had the massive events that drew the most people, but they were work. And then you had the tacticals. There were no crowds, and it was a tactical. And there were some awesome tacticals. We did some absolutely fabulous tacticals.
Those are some of my favorites.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Go ahead. What one?
Oh, well, I was asked a question earlier too, what were my favorite events?
Yeah.
And as I think about it, two come to mind. I had mentioned earlier the Greenfield Village event, which was not for the public, it was for the Mudsills, it was a civilian event. We started out the whole day with like workshops, training workshops about, Joe Covey was doing traveling clothing of men in the mid-1860s, and Bill Boudreau, late Bill Boudreau, about etiquette in the 19th century and dance moves and all this kind of stuff. And we put it all together by going to the Eagle Tavern and putting it to work without the public watching, but just experiencing exactly what it is you would do with that kind of event in an evening. It was a very, very magical evening for me. But as far as the military event, the one that strikes me on the other half is the 1995 Chickamauga. That one where
Yes.
we were there with the road, they had posted us in one field, and on the other side of the road were the Confederates. And at first that didn't seem right, but it became right that as we kind of sized each other up, you know, it was an interesting exchange of viewpoints and looking at the impressions. And I think at that point in 1995, we were probably at the peak of fine-tuning what the Western Federal looked like
Right.
at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And the result of that was the wet plate image that's been circulated around in the company, that every time I look at it, I can't fault anything in that image. People look right and in place, and it really just gives me chills looking at it.
Yes. That's my screensaver.
George, what about you?
You know, it's difficult to pinpoint a favorite event. We did so many that were memorable. Garrison duty at Niagara was always fantastic. Lookout Mountain in November with the snow and everything, fantastic. But you know, it's more memory of a certain thing that happened. And I was fortunate enough to have been on the few reenactments held on National Park property in the early 60s. There was a couple accidents and the Park Service wouldn't allow it. But at Chickamauga, I don't know which year, after hours, when most of the public was gone, the Rangers came and the historian came and said they had asked Claiborne's to move to a ridge off in the distance behind Snodgrass Hill, and we went to a ridge just behind the hill. And they told us that they really wanted to see, they had seen reenactments, they were horrible. And they were putting this on for themselves, no public allowed, and really don't tell anybody. But we did a skirmish in formation, you know, at Chickamauga, which may have been the only reenactment of sorts held on federal property since the early 1960s. And I really remember that because, for one thing, you're on where it really happened, but also they were way off in the distance. It wasn't one of these things, okay, we're 100 yards apart, just have a battle. They were, what, 1,000 yards?
Oh, yes.
At least, yeah. And that was really memorable from the situation that, yeah, this is the kind of distance. Civil War battles weren't all fought, you know, muzzle to muzzle. And the other thing was, hey, we're really doing this where it happened. The federal troops were actually here, and the Confederate troops were over there, and this is the spot. So, yeah, over the years, like I said, I remember a lot of things, but that one really kind of stands out.
Yeah, I think for all of us when you do something on the actual ground, it really adds something to it. I was at an event earlier this year at Fort Blakely, and they put us out in the rifle pits on Friday night, and we're sitting out there, and I turned to one of the guys, one of the organizers, I said, we're doing the 83rd Ohio. I said, are these the rifle pits the 83rd Ohio dug? They said, oh yeah, these are the original ones. And that just made, I mean, there's just something about being on the actual ground that just adds something to it. And there were a lot of Ohio units there in Snodgrass Hill, at Chickamauga. Because I did a Confederate living history one time, and I refused to fire. I acted like I was firing, but I wasn't going to fire because I said there were actual Ohio guys coming up that slope, so I wasn't going to fire on Ohio guys. We talked, you know, obviously about the Mudsills, and you know it's a federal Western impression. Who are the Confederates? We talked a little bit about this, but who are the Confederates that were kind of on the same path as the Mudsills back in, say, the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
Claibornes were the leaders.
You know, they were originally called the 1st Arkansas, and then they did the same thing we did. They started bringing other units in and became Claiborne's command. The Texas, I forget Danny Sesson's unit, Texas Guard or something. They were so far away we didn't see them much, but they were every bit as good as Claiborne's as we were. That was at that time. That was about it. Other groups came along. The Old 4th Kentucky developed into a pretty good unit, and all that. But yeah, Claiborne's and man, I can't remember his unit, but Texas Guard or whatever it was. Yeah.
Did you guys get matched up against the authentic?
Always.
Yeah, we
events?
made sure we did.
Okay.
They would seek us out on
A lot of people talked about the SVR. They didn't like the SVR. The SVR did this and that. I always got along with Chet Schreiber, their leader. But at SVR events, Chet would always match the authentic units against each other. Yeah, always.
For those with the SVR, what was the SVR?
Sons of Veterans Reserve.
Okay. All right.
And they were offshoot of the Sons of Union Veterans. They were military arm. They had been around forever, and they were actually called up for service in the Spanish-American War as a backup to the troops that left for Florida for the front. And they were they sponsored a lot of events that we went to back in the days before, you know, after the Centennial.